Good morning. I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you. Going to spend some time talking to you about you and your business. As you know, I've been on assignment quite a bit recently. Really have missed the studios, but glad to be back. And really grateful for my team of the great broadcast journalists who've been bringing our show to you quite a bit lately, but always glad to get back into the studio, especially when Hessam Parzivand is our guest. And Hessam's a regular on the Price of Business program and has been for quite a while. And we love what he does. He's with the Parzivand Law Firm, which you can find at PARZfirm.com. And always glad to have you on. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very, very well. I'm actually going to be headed to Iran today to visit family for the first time in 9.5 years. So very, very excited about the upcoming trip.
Yeah, very good. Talk a little bit about your firm before we get into our topics, which, by the way, are really very timely about it. You know, I'm glad to be able to cover them.
Yes. My firm is a primarily labor and employment law firm. I practiced labor and employment law for about 5 years, graduated in HR from Louisiana State University, and also hold a certification in HR, which I got prior to getting my law degree. And that's pretty much the summary of the firm. Yeah,
very, very good. Now, it seems like Uber is in the news all the time. Really not the kind of stories I'm wanting to see about Uber, because I'm like their biggest fan. I'm almost tempted to get an Uber tattoo. I love Uber so much. And of course, in my case, I don't have a single tattoo on my body, so that shows how much devotion I have. But they're having a difficult time lately here in Texas. Some of the city governments are putting requirements on them that could take 60 days before someone could get approved. And these aren't people who would say, I'm going to start an Uber service, or I am going to buy a franchise. They don't have 60 days of cash flow to sit around and do nothing. They need to get going tomorrow. And so, that's a local, close to home issue. But they got some really big stuff going on in places like California and Minnesota and Massachusetts. Give us a little bit of background on that story before we get into it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's a topic I think we talked about. I'm pretty sure on the first show that I ever appeared on the program, and that is whether these Uber drivers are in fact independent contractors or employees. And like when there is any controversy, typically lawsuits are filed, and lawsuits have been filed against Uber. And most recently, there was a announcement of a settlement of two classes of California and Massachusetts employees of Uber. And very surprisingly, that settlement was a $100 million deal just for California and Massachusetts. According to court filings, that only represents about 12% of the total amount that the drivers could have collected had they actually won their case. And very, very interestingly, Lyft has also offered to settle a case for $12.25 million, but in fact, that agreement was rejected by the judge in that case as insubstantial. And important to note, in the collective action and class action context, the judges do have final authority on whether these settlement agreements are approved. And I don't think it looks really, really good for Lyft or Uber when a judge is rejecting, a settlement with a substantial sum of money and saying that settlement is insubstantial. And if I remember correctly, that settlement was a similar percentage. It might have been 10% of the total amount that these drivers could have been entitled to. So, I mean, if you're saying that 10% isn't enough, you're basically saying that they at least have a decent shot at winning.
And so a lot of this, it really comes down to who you end up getting as a judge, too, doesn't it?
It does. It definitely does, and I would bet that I'm personally I work as a plaintiff side collective action and class action lawyer. I think venue is a very, very important thing with regard to these types of cases. For example, a case in Texas, I would be pretty hard pressed to take a case in Texas personally. But a case in California, that would be a very, very different story. Mainly a few reasons. There is one overarching federal law, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that applies to these cases. But in addition to that, and where these drivers seem to have been more successful, is that California and Massachusetts have state laws, and the big factor in those state laws is that they have laws regarding expense reimbursement. So if you're a misclassified independent contractor and you incur expenses under California or Massachusetts law, and your employer doesn't pay for, and then you find out you're an employee, your employer has to pay for all of those expenses. So that's the real law that is capturing or causing these huge settlements, because what the Uber drivers are saying is that we were employees, and therefore under Massachusetts and California law, we should have been paid all of our mileage.
Mm-hmm.
And our cell phone expenses, for that matter, too.
So it's a unique California-Massachusetts problem. This doesn't mean it's going to be systemic nationwide.
It doesn't necessarily, but, I mean, if you're looking at, if California and Massachusetts courts are determining, in favor of employee status, that could be used as precedent, and maybe courts, in Texas would one day, pick up some of those precedents, and, eventually, I think there would be some judges that may go each way. But for now, I would say this is more of a liberal jurisdiction risk than a conservative jurisdiction risk.
But
what I would predict. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, but the deal is that there's law supporting California and Massachusetts decisions. To my knowledge, those laws don't exist, at least in Texas.
Not that I'm aware of. We don't have any reimbursement law that I'm aware of. I think you'd have to make a pretty creative claim, but there isn't anything explicit that says that you've got to reimburse in this way. So, and
I was just going to say, we had two topics. We got like a minute left. Why don't you kind of whet our appetite with the other topic?
Well, in honor of Mother's Day, I thought it would be a good idea to talk a little bit about pregnancy and its effects in the workplace, especially leave for pregnancy. And basically, the basic rundown is you've got two laws that potentially apply. You have the Family Medical Leave Act. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to everyone. It only applies to employers that have 50 employees within 75 miles. And under the Family Medical Leave Act, you can potentially obtain 12 weeks of leave, unpaid leave, for pregnancy. If you're unfortunate enough to be at an employer that doesn't have 50 employees within 75 miles, then your next option is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the Americans with Disabilities Act simply provides for leave as a reasonable accommodation. So it's very, very fact-specific whether you're entitled to leave or not. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act kind of, in a way, dovetails with the Americans with Disabilities Act in that regard. So those are the protections, and that applies to employers that have 15 or more employees, which obviously would be many more employers than the Family Medical Leave Act.
Mm-hmm. Hessam, I always appreciate having you on the program. Very good information. Your website?
PARZfirm.com.
PARZfirm.com. You always bring very timely topics. Certainly people need to chew on this. I, for one, am going to continue to support Uber because it is giving access to the American dream to a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be able to do that. But I'm really glad that you bring some timely information, really some issues that eventually they've got to figure out how to navigate these. They sure have a lot of challenges. But I believe this model's here to stay. It may end up being in a different name because of all of the issues that Uber and Lyft seem to have. But I think this business model is here to stay.
Yeah, I mean it'll be a major hit if they can't operate in California and Massachusetts, but maybe if that happens, they will come back to places like Austin.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks so much for being with us. All right.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Do you want to remind the listener the show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. While there, like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter, and you're listening to The Price of Business.